And now Work Matters with Julie Mann.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show that ponders the question, does work really matter? And if so, why? On this show, we talk about work, that place where we all spend quite a bit of time, and why not make it matter? And why not talk to experts in the field that can help us think through different aspects of that? So today, I'm thrilled to say that we have on the show with us online, we have Ira Wolfe. And Ira is the president and the chief Googlization officer at a company called Success Performance Solutions. But one of the tags I loved when I was reading about Ira's background, it says he's a millennial trapped in a baby boomer's body. And so you will find as we kind of get into this topic with Ira, we're going to talk about today, the topic is when the shift hits the plan. Love that, Ira. So great line. So we're going to talk about shift and we're going to talk about change and how that's impacting work. So Ira, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks very much, Julie. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Love talking about that as well. So.
Oh my gosh, just love it. I thought that was such a great tag. So let's talk about, what is the shift? What is that shift?
Well, we're in 2020 and we've had this pandemic. And prior to that, people didn't understand when I talked about the pace of change, people said, oh, yeah, we've always had change, and yet things are changing so fast. But no one really appreciated what exponential change meant or felt like. Right. And then we had this pandemic. And
that little thing.
Overnight, millions of people were sent home. And overnight, people were expected to work remote. Schools closed down. Theaters closed down, Broadway closed down. Right. That's everybody was living in exponential change. And not only that, it was talked about every minute on the news. Right. No matter what you talked about, it was the exponential curve, and this is going to grow exponentially. So what the shift was, and again, there were a lot of people talking about it, including me, for years, that the pace of change was accelerating, and that we were going to be living in a world which the Army came up with a great acronym about 30 years ago. I
did not know that was an Army term, so I found that really interesting. So please go ahead and share.
Yeah, it's a military term. Yeah. VUCA, VUCA, V-U-C-A, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And what they determined in the not quite that far back, the late 1980s, early 1990s, Berlin Wall came down. And that, they envisioned a future where we would not be fighting countries per se, or invading countries, or they wouldn't be trying to invade us, but we would be fighting terrorist organizations, which were this amorphous group, that there were no boundaries, and, even moving to cybersecurity, we wouldn't be attacked by armies of people, but by bots, right. And so they had to look at at defense and at the world differently. So they came up with the term VOCA, and it's really I can't think of a better acronym to describe the current state of events as being volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous.
Right.
And we are absolutely
in the middle
not
of it.
Prepared to be able to do that, because as you and I talked about in another segment, and, I've written a lot about, is about this fixed and growth mindset. And, frankly, you can't survive in a VUCA world with a fixed mindset where everything is perfect and everything's planned out and you have time to plan it and you have choices. Things just happen like a pandemic. And although the pandemic is a once in 100 years, it is not the last event. When you think about the course of this year, we've had the pandemic, we've had the largest social unrest in 50 years that we've had simultaneously in the midst of this. We've had an economy, and you can blame it whatever caused it. I mean, an economy that collapsed and record unemployment that we haven't seen in 90 years. All these things happening within a 6-month period.
Right. Yeah. And, all of those, from an HR perspective or from a work perspective, that's a lot of, that's VUCA coming at you, right? That's a lot of change.
So going back to when the shift hits your plan, and that was actually the original title of my book. And, very frankly, it would just been about futurists, and I wanted to relate it to a lot to work,
Right.
as you talk about all the time.
Right.
I wanted to look about the work. How is it going to affect how people got jobs and how they found work and how companies found people to do the work. But the core part of the book was talking about not only how quickly the world was going to change, but what was going to change.
Right.
So, in it, which is also amazing with the pandemic, because we got a sneak peek at some of this. In the book, I talk quite a bit about like autonomous vehicles. And whether you believe that there's going to be an autonomous vehicle or not, it's science, and they're coming, and they're already here, and we already have some autonomy within our cars now. With the it's identifying when somebody's pulling up alongside of you, and computers or cars are really computers on wheels.
Right.
So,
oh yeah. Exactly.
So mechanics. Yeah, there's some mechanical pieces to it, but mostly is they identify the board that they need to replace.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's what it is. But when you look back in the last 6 or 7 months of what happened when traffic stopped, well, any business that was along the route of traffic suffered. They weren't busy because there were no cars on the road. And gasoline consumption went down, and it disrupted all the markets. People learned that this is kind of nice. I don't have to be in my car all the time. I don't need as many cars. I don't need repairs. We're not having accidents. So insurance companies gave you refunds because they didn't have to pay out as much damages. The downstream effect from an autonomous vehicle is massive. Right. And we talked about it, and people said, that'll never happen, just like a pandemic won't happen, and just like, all these other things. There was an event after an event, 3D printing. All of a sudden, 3D printing became in the news because we couldn't keep up with the supplies for PPE, for protection devices. And all of a sudden, people in their basements had a 3D printing machine. Were creating masks and shields. So it basically said what we talked about, and many of us talked about in the shift. What was this? The shift was going to be accelerated by technology. Whether it was sensors or 3D printing or autonomous vehicles or AI or machine learning, go down the whole list.
Right.
And that was going to prompt a shift in the way that we lived. Well, overnight, technology technically saved us. And what the pandemic did was actually accelerated the shift. It didn't slow it down. It just look at the stock markets and all this, at the tech stocks. Look at Zoom.
Right.
Zoom, literally within an 8-week period, Zoom went from 10 million users a day to 300 million a day. I don't know what the current number is, but that's insane. Yeah. And now people are saying, people got comfortable. People hate it. They don't like being in front of screens. They need personal contact. Right. But it's going to be part of us.
Exactly.
I was on a call yesterday about event planning and, about theater and events and sports. And it's not going back to the way it was. People will go back to a football, it's football season. So people are going to want to go back to that. People are longing to go back to the theater. But, is it going to happen at the same rate? Is that experience going to be the same thing?
I even think sorry to interrupt, but I even think like work. If you think about, I remember I read an article, I'm going to say 3 years ago now. And it was something, and it did this projection that said that by 2023, I think it was 43% of all workers would be gig workers. And I remember reading that so much because I said to several of my counterparts, can you believe this? Like, that's not going to happen. And by 2023, we're not that far away from that. And now just even the way that the pandemic and everything that's going on from a pace perspective, we're finding that gig worker is, another kind of that thing that's a result of some of the pandemic as well, is because, we're saying, okay, what do I need to piece together? And the whole gig worker is like all of a sudden, when I look at it, even from a recruiting standpoint of view, it's on steroids because people have found out that they can become a gig worker. They can actually do a great job at it. They can have a great living at it. And it's kind of fun to have a couple of different things to do as opposed to one. And I think that's going to impact as well.
No, absolutely. Well, everybody became a gig worker. I mean, everybody who was working from home was, this is how gig workers work. And,
exactly.
And the fact that now they may have had they still were getting a paycheck and they had a project. But the fact of the matter is once people were forced to figure it out, they figured it out. And not everybody likes it. There's certainly a part of the population that longs to go back to work in an office in a corporate setting. But a lot of, even if they want to go back, I keep bringing this up. There's a lot of, a lot of the tech companies have said, hey, we're going to change the way we work. We're going to, you can stay home if you want to work remotely. But even a more traditional business like Nationwide Insurance, announced soon after the pandemic started, they had 20 corporate centers across the U.S. 16 of them were shutting down.
Right.
16 corporate centers are shutting down. So, again, if you wanted to leave your home or apartment or wherever you lived and go to work, and you worked for Nationwide, that's not going to happen.
Right. Yep.
Even yesterday it was pretty interesting. Again, there was a lot of entertainment people on, and they talked about the theater, and they talked about like the gaffers, and a lot of the people who are electricians or tech people. A lot of the theater was, whether it's movies or live theater, was tech. And because that industry is not coming back, a lot of those people are leaving those professions and going out for new jobs. So part of it is even when those industries come back, and this goes for any business. I don't care if you own a restaurant. Many of the workers that you had are not going to be available indefinitely, especially in a gig economy. But they're looking for other forms of work, and this may have been the catalyst to be able to do that. So that its shift is literally just the acceleration of change. That's what it is. And we anticipated it was going to happen by technology, and it did. But we didn't anticipate we were going to get the super spreader of a pandemic that just accelerated the shift. The pace of the shift. Right. So, I had done a summit last year. I think it was in September, so it was literally a year ago, and it was called Workforce 2030. And I said at that conference that whatever you expected to happen, whatever you read about what was going to happen in 2050 would happen by 2030, and whatever you thought was going to be in 2030 was going to be 2025. I was wrong because in March it happened in 2020. So.
Yeah. Well, I find it fascinating in your book, and again, I didn't mention when we first started, Ira's written 6 books. This is his 6th book, but he wrote a book called about recruiting in the age of Googlization. And, even in some of the key points where you were talking about that shift, this was probably pre-pandemic, and you were saying that the 21st century will be equivalent to 20,000 years of progress at today's rate of change. And when I read that, I was like, wow, that was a key point. And, now we've got pandemic on top of that. So, that pace, that VUCA, all of that, disruptive change, the amount of change, you called it massive transformational change. All of that is coming to a theater near you. And how do we incorporate that? How do we incorporate that into our lives? How do we incorporate it into our work? I think you made a quote about, technology, jobs, and people. How do what's that convergence look like? And all of that amount of change is all coming together, and we're all trying to figure out, okay, how do we incorporate that, right?
Absolutely, and adaptability is going to be huge. Just moments before, minutes before we started to talk, it was actually on another call, about adaptability, and it's with an organization that's really invested heavily in that. And we talk about how do we become more adaptable, and adaptability is a skill. I mean, we thought of it before as there's some people more flexible, they're more open-minded. We didn't think a whole lot in the past what made people more adaptable or what made people have a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. But the adaptability, they took it down, and the impact is some people have a natural ability, but it's a skill. It's not just you got it or you don't. You can change your hardwiring, but it's also your character, which gets into your mindset. But it's also the environment. And I think if there's anything that has come out of this, maybe for the positive, maybe it's the silver lining in the pandemic, is that organizations or institutions were not very adaptable.
Right.
Government was not very adaptable.
Right. And those are things.
Education is for sure was not very. They were completely flat-footed. Yeah. Many businesses were not adaptable, and many adapted fast. They learned how to do it. Right. They learned how to, hey, we're bottling alcohol. Now we're going to bottle disinfectant. Right. We're making transmissions. Now we're going to, we're going to make face shields.
I'm going to jump in there, Ira. We're going to have to kind of cut for this segment and join us again on another one. We're having great conversation with Ira Wolfe. Everyone, thanks for listening. Let's impact today, transform tomorrow, and let's make work that matters.